Today we're gonna have the legendary Suikoden 2 versus the Legend of Dragoon. Two extremely legendary and beloved and classic turn-based RPG. Fans have been begging for a long time for them to be remastered. Suikoden 2 is finally going to happen this very same year. Legend of Dragoon, I don't know when, but maybe someday. And it's time to start making your arguments that I will read. So High News Zero Tester says, man, I loved both of these, but I think Suikoden 2 is marginally better because it has decent cast and story, while gameplay-wise Legend of Dragoon is way better. Oof, you have no idea how strongly I disagree with that. But okay, that's your argument, I respect that. Terry says, Legend of Dragoon because its combat system is better in my opinion. Never liked Suikoden's combat. Also, Legend of Dragoon is so much better from an artistic standpoint if you ask me. Okay, okay. Kevin Lewis says Suikoden 2 emphasizes that more characters is better. And what I mean by that, basically every Star of Destiny has their own interesting stories with no fluff in between. Okay, I respect their argument, and of course I'm in favor of Suikoden 2, but don't you think that Legend of Dragoon has a more traditional style of characters, you know, and there's a lot of development for them, whereas in Suikoden 2 it's like Chrono Cross or the Fire Emblem series. There's only like 5 or 10 characters that matter, and the rest of the characters are like just kinda there. Basically, Legend of Dragoon is basically medieval of Power Rangers, so you're gonna choose Legend of Dragoon over Suikoden 2? MGS mega fan, Metal Gear Solid mega fan. Radical Dreamer says, Legend of Dragoon was one of the most unique JRPGs I ever played. It also hit some nostalgic bells with a single notes screenshots, which Suikoden lacks, because it's not so unique. Wow, okay. Again, that's another argument I strongly disagree with. Suikoden, in my opinion, is one of the most unique video games ever made, but that's just my opinion. Brian H. 1988 says, Legend of Dragoon wins for me, besides that because of my strong desire for that sort of combat system to make a comeback. I want to see more of that style so much. Okay. Rosland RP Gacha says, I believe Suikoden 2 has had many sequels and its story is very engrossing, while Legend of Dragoon has had none. And Suikoden 2 is much less linear than Legend of Dragoon, and wins in all categories but music. Again, I disagree, I think Suikoden has a better soundtrack, but okay. Okay, Melphis Sky says, Suikoden 2 has some really good characters, decent gameplay, and has a villain so vile, you are cheering when he finally gets what's coming to him. So, okay. Nice argument. Jordan Young says, Suikoden 2 is more popular, yes, but it's by virtue of its quality and how strong the word of mouth was. Legend of Dragoon had all the ads and promos back in the year 2000, sold more, nostalgia is stronger, yet Suikoden 2 is more known and liked today. Why is that? I bake it down to the fact that Suikoden 2 stood the test of time via its quality despite less sales and nostalgia, whereas Legend of Dragoon is ass. Okay, not ass, but still. I couldn't agree more. You're stating some objective facts in there. That's right, that's true. Legend of Dragoon sold more and was heavily advertised, whereas Suikoden 2 was the underdog, but eventually Suikoden 2 aged much better, whereas Legend of Dragoon didn't age very well. I agree with that. So, yeah. Nice argument, man. Compelling argument. Pretty objective-ish. Ryan says, Suikoden 2 is my pick. The combat system in The Legend of Dragoon was very frustrating, especially the timing mechanics. So we got a detractor of the battle system that a lot of people have been praising. Our project says, I prefer Suikoden 2 because story is more political, not the teenager saving the world, and the most important music in Suikoden is more memorable. Okay. Kevin says, Legend of Dragoon is better growing up because of its compelling gameplay. There is so much interaction and thought put into it. Also, Legend of Dragoon has better visuals, music, and gameplay. Okay. So, the poll is over. Suikoden 2 won with 58%. And the Legend of Dragoon lost with 42%, based on 90 votes. That's awesome, because as much I loved the Legend of Dragoon, I'm a much bigger fan of Suikoden 2, and you guys know that, so the outcome for me personally was predictable. So, Suikoden 2 is a game I've covered to death, to super death in this channel, so I don't have a lot to say that I haven't already said in a million videos, so I'll be quick. I think Suikoden 2 is the better game because, number one, it aged much better. The Legend of Dragoon aged like shit, to be honest. It's still worth playing, it's still, I mean, the remastered, the port, the upscaled port, well, the port with upscale graphics of the Legend of Dragoon looks fantastic on PS4 and PS5, and I do recommend that version, but still, Suikoden 2 is aged well, and it didn't even need a port and with upscale graphics. Sure, it's getting a remaster, and the remaster looks beautiful, of course, but we're comparing the original versions here together, PS1 versions. And Suikoden 2 is just the better game, first and foremost because of that. It's just so much fun to play, whereas Legend of Dragoon, there's a lot of puzzles, a lot of annoying areas, a lot of random encounters. Battles take longer. I love the combat system in the Legend of Dragoon, don't take me wrong, but I think Suikoden 2 had a more compelling system because it combines 6 characters instead of 3, and you got different runes and different possibilities to make happen, different combination attacks and stuff like that, whereas the Legend of Dragoon relies only on the creative idea, it is creative, of the timing attacks, and that's it, and transforming into the Dragoons, which is someone once saying this is the 90s Power Rangers, the medieval Power Rangers, which is funny. It's a funny comparison, but about, I think the Legend of Dragoon is still a great battle system, but Suikoden 2 has 3 battle mechanics, so it can compete, and the 3 battle mechanics in Suikoden are much more fun, more engaging, and more compelling than the one in Legend of Dragoon. So I also believe that in terms of story, they're kind of on equal terms, but they're very different, you know. Sure, both revolve around a specific war, but Legend of Dragoon is a much more fantasy setting than Suikoden 2. And honestly, in terms of setting, I couldn't really decide. Both are just as fantastic. But in terms of storytelling and narrative, I prefer Suikoden 2 because it's more mature. I'm not saying Dragoon doesn't have any mature themes. It does, and some dark stuff here and there. Rose is one of my favorite video game characters from the PS1 era of all time. I fucking love Rose passionately. But I think Suikoden 2 is more memorable because of what the characters go through, what happens near the end, and the decision making and the, not roots, but the different endings and what's going on in there, the tragedy involved in some of the bad endings. You know, it's just a much more appealing story for me. It's more tragic, it's more political, it's darker. Whereas Legend of Dragoon has this rich lore. Yes, the lore is amazing in Dragoon, but I still think the lore wins in Suikoden 2. But that's cheating because Suikoden has a lore that's been expanded across several games in the series. So, yeah. Suikoden 2 wins in the lore, but because it has an advantage. So it's unfair to compare the lore. So if we forget about Suikoden 2 being called Suikoden 2 and it's just Suikoden, that's it, and there's no other games in the series, I think the lore wins in Legend of Dragoon. It's just more interesting in what happened before. When you learn what happened before, it's just more interesting. The lore wins in Legend of Dragoon, actually. But I'm more of... I tend to give preference to something like Suikoden 2. Because it's more realistic, you know? It's not that fantastic. And while I love fantasy, I think I still prefer Suikoden 2. And in terms of music, I think the Dragoon soundtrack is amazing. I love it, but Suikoden 2 is so memorable. And I did an episode in the podcast, a podcast episode based on Suikoden 2, and I explained there why the music is so special, because you get all these places you visit, these towns, these areas, or these battle themes, you know, that are so diverse, and then you go in there and you listen to them and you're like, I mean, you immediately notice the music. And in Dragoon, most of the time, there are some really memorable themes too, but most of the time you kind of don't pay attention to the music, or it's just there in the background. Like, it's good, you're enjoying it, but it's not that special. It doesn't make you stop most of the time. Sometimes you do stop and you're like, oh my god, this theme is awesome. But most of the time you're like, you just keep playing. And whereas in Suikoden 2, half of the time you just stop. You're like, this music, what the hell? It's awesome. So I think the Suikoden 2 soundtrack is just more memorable and more iconic than the one in the Legend of Dragoon. And that's it. That's why I believe Suikoden 2 is the better game. And I'm so glad it won in the poll. So what do you guys think? Say whatever you want to say right now in the chat, or leave a comment for the video when it's up. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. And see you next time.